everyone, and welcome to Breaktime Conversations, a YouTube channel where I have conversations around education. I have been a teacher all my life, and along my journey, I have met so many interesting and inspiring people. And so I decided to document my conversations with them here so that you too can hear their stories and the amazing work that they do. I'm here today with Avinash Krishnan, sorry. He's somebody that I met in Nepal at the Lausanne World Congress in 2017. And that at that Congress, we were talking about climate, about education, and all sorts of things. And we had a lot of fun together, and we've kept in touch ever since. He's the National Director and CEO at A Rocha India. A Rocha is a global family of conservation organizations working together in response to the worldwide crisis of biodiversity loss to carry out community-based conservation projects. Avinash himself has many years of experience in the field of ecology and wildlife conservation, and he has published numerous articles and research papers on mammals, birds, and reptiles. Avinash, it's so good to see you again, and I'm excited to talk to you about the environmental education that you do with school students. So why don't you tell us more about that?
Thanks, Anupa. Thanks for that introduction. It's such a pleasure to connect with you. Although we haven't met since we interacted first at Nepal. But nonetheless, this is also an opportunity for me to talk to you as well as share some of my views and working with regard to environmental education, which is something that I've been associated with as part of the organization that I represent. So environmental education is a very critical component, primarily to kind of understand the challenges that the environment faces in this current Anthropocene, where you see a lot of changes related to climate, soil, forests, lakes, rivers, aquatic resources. So the component of environmental education is primarily to sensitize people, especially the ones that were directly impacted by environmental crisis. And therefore, creating awareness and propagating right values when it comes to managing and safeguarding the environment is something that's very, very pivotal. So in that way, my association has been with largely rural communities, especially in rural agrarian landscapes close to forested ecosystems, not very far from where I live, Bangalore. And we impart various models, primarily through experiential learning, activity-based, as well as participatory models wherein students and children especially can come and experience environment on a real-time basis. So that way we've been quite successful in building that stewardship for protection and preservation and conservation in a very small ecosystem where we work in.
Nice. I really love that, the sound of participatory models. So can you tell us more about that? That sounds really interesting.
The participatory model is something that's in lines of what we call as experiential learning. We primarily have students, even urban students for that matter, because there is a massive divide between urban and rural understanding when it comes to matters of environment. Right? I think both have to be equally resilient to kind of understand the implications of environment firstly. So that way, participatory model is trying to give an exposure of the local ecosystem, especially if there is a child that hails from a village, and if the child is not able to identify a local plant or a local tree or a local species of animal that he or she lives around, then there is automatically that disconnect. So that way, with the facilities that we have, especially in the landscape where we work, we have a campus where students are brought in and they're imparted this indigenous knowledge, primarily through various participatory activities like identifying birds and butterflies, also bringing a component of science, which is also something that we do. So in that regard, it becomes more involved, right? The child is able to relate to the surroundings, if not relate to climate change in different parts of the world. So that way, that participation becomes much more better in terms of learning the ability and also making it more engaging and fun. Also, kind of makes it as part of the regular discourse of growing up and not something that is more institutional or something that has to be taught just for the sake of a degree or maybe just be able to go to the next grade. So that way, it's more outdoor and more experiential.
Cool. So, how long does this whole thing typically last? Like when you engage with students, is it over a few days or over a few weeks, or how does it work?
So we have multiple ways of doing it. Also depends on the availability of students, and also depending on their age and which grade they are from. Primarily, with the kind of experiences that we've had in the years is primarily a day engagement where students are brought in on a day where they have an off from regular school and they're given a day long exposure. In some cases, where we have institutional partnerships with various schools, even government schools for that matter, we have 2 day camps, 3 day camps where we tie up with agencies like the Forest Department and other partner organizations and have a more like a workshop model, like a camp, where they get to stay overnight, experience the forest, stay over and pitch their own tents, kind of give them that kind of rustic and, forest experience, despite living around a forest, right? Now, despite, especially in the rural sector, they do live around forest, but they're not able to view the forest the way they should be viewing, and at least they have the benefits of what the forests are actually giving them. So that way, in this informed approach, whether it's through a day engagement or maybe the 2 day, 3 day engagement, they get a much more holistic understanding of how they should be mindful and also respectful about the environment and what their responsibility is, not just at their level, but also trying to influence their parents, because we've also seen in some of our education programs there is a nice continuum between parent, teacher, and the student. So in that way, so the students serve as a grassroots entity in trying and conveying that message, and therefore the entire community in that sense gets transformed through the understanding of the child. So that's been quite successful in our work.
Nice. I like what you said about the rural kids. And what impact have you made on the urban kids? What difference do you see when you interact with them?
See the impact. See, the thing with environmental education is I'd like to believe that it's a continuous process, right? Especially with the urban kids because of the kind of regular educational mandates they have, that the paucity of time is quite high, right? I mean, they do not have that much of time that they can kind of engage in long term kind of programs or activities that even what we offer and even what other organizations offer. So that way, I think trying and imparting this knowledge into the regular curriculum is what we've done in some select schools, where we have an environmental education program that is ingrained into their teaching mandate. We work with some teachers, we work with some head of institutions that way, so that some aspects of this can be brought into the regular curriculum, wherein during an EVS session mandate, they have some aspects of this that's much more, relatable. So that way, we've had some success with some of the urban schools, especially. But I think it also goes back to creating content online, especially in the post-COVID digital era that we are in right now. That we also create a lot of visual content, which seems to be more accessible by the urban students, urban folk. So that way, by providing content and by creating this series of information drive that can be passed on to them, we hope that they will have a greater consciousness about the planet and things that need to be done to safeguard it.
Yeah, you're right about it being a continuous process. So, what would a day long, like a typical day at your center, if a group of students come in, what would it be like?
Well, it starts up very early. I mean, in my current position, I don't get to spend a lot of time with students. We have a team of people who are education practitioners, who are teachers, who are people who are very passionate about kids. So I have to narrate their experience. Clearly, it starts early because I think nature is best observed at the time of dawn. So, so the activities are planned around our field study centers. We have 2 field study centers just south of Bangalore, one in a place called Banalghata and just along the interstate border between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu at Lakshmipura. Now, these are very rustic localities just abutting protected areas like the Banalghata National Park, Kaveri North Wildlife Sanctuary. So a typical day would mean that the students come into the campus. The campus itself is a learning center. We have an interpretation center. We have a nature trail. We have a tree house. We have a bird hide. We have a lake. We have a mini forest. So a lot of activities that are there by the virtue of the fact that these facilities exist in our campuses. And so students are given various sets of trainings, activities, tasks, games, interactions around these facilities that we have. And we also partner with the local forest department in opening up the larger forest, the protected area that is there, and there is a part of that area that is designated for education related activities. So we kind of expose them in observing and documenting nature, which is very, very important. I personally believe that people should be aware of what they have found, especially I've also noticed when I've interacted with some of the kids in the city, they don't know where the rice comes from. They don't know where the coconut comes from. They think it comes from supermarkets. So I think that way we kind of engage with the students basically to try and expose them, that about the planet, as well as understand the touch and feel experience about how certain things look and how certain things behave, and what contributes to what, and trying to make it a very holistic thing, whereas the child doesn't feel that living today is not just a personal entitlement, but it's a communal responsibility. It's more of an environmental need, right? Human beings are just another species and not the only species. So that way, to be respectful of other life forms is something that we try and inculcate in all the activities. So, and a typical good day, it starts at maybe around 7:38 and goes on till around 5, 6. And then we also have nighttime discussions across campfires and these herpetology walks where we get to document frogs and snakes and all of that. So it's a full day packed with activities. Even in 3-4 days, also there's absolutely no time to think of anything else but immerse yourself in nature. Yeah.
So nice and so important. I do know that kids today really think rice is out of a supermarket, milk is out of a packet. It's really so important that they go back to their roots. So Avinash, I want to go to you now and find out, how did you get into this interesting field that you're in? I haven't met very many people who are doing what you do. So how did you get into it?
Well, I think for me, it started off as young. I mean, my dad especially hailed from the Nilgiris. He grew up there, and so for me, um, growing up was visiting forests all the time. Like every summer vacations, I'm typically a Bangalorean boy. I grew up here, but for me, summer vacations were always planned around the hills. And the serene drive that you have from Bangalore to Ooty itself was great because you pass through some of the most renowned protected areas of the south. So seeing wildlife on the road and trying to be amidst that kind of ingrained that feeling of being able to experience this all through my life. I think it started off with a very selfish proposition, I think, to be immersed around nature and wildlife and animals. And yeah, so I continue to do that. And I think my parents have been very supportive of the decisions I took eventually later on when I started doing my undergrad and furthering education at that level. And they've been kind of supportive, although it was not a very regular mandate back then. It was clearly me taking an off-beaten path, but I was very confident and sure about the space that I really wanted to be. I've always romanticized forests by reading several authors talking about their experiences being in nature. So all of that put together kind of motivated me to take up this seriously. Although I didn't formally start off with science like what I do, I obviously worked as in a voluntary capacity with various conservation organizations. Back then, there were not many organizations offering volunteering opportunities and tasks that were related to environment and conservation and wildlife. So I started off partnering with those organizations, trying to be of some help to understand how the system is. And yeah, until I could realize that it ended up being a full-time mandate. I do for a full-time proposition. And I can't separate sometimes as to what I do because it's something I'm very, very passionate about. I've been quite consistent for almost 16 years now. And yeah, so I think the formative experiences essentially kind of drove me to take this on a serious level, and also understanding the responsibility that I have. Although I started with a selfish mandate of being around forest and wildlife, but I think looking at it now, I think all of us have a massive responsibility of safeguarding these forests and wildlife for the future generations or for the betterment of current lifestyles. So therefore, yeah, so I think that's where I stand right now.
So cool. Very few people don't take that road not taken, right? And you did. You were brave enough to do it. Thank you so much, Avinash. As we come to the end of this conversation, I just want to ask you, what message do you have for all of us? Because everything around us is collapsing. I mean, we can feel the heat here in Bangalore, which we're really not used to, and that's definitely climate change and so many things around us. So, what message can you give to us as an
Well,
environmental?
I'm not yet that old to give a message of, but I'd like to reinstate the strapline of my organization, which says conservation and hope. And I think, although, like you rightly said, there is so much of crises that is going on, especially when it comes to the matters of the planet. I think it's also impetus that there's so much of goodness that also exists. We still have so much left, right? We still have a planet that is still beating its heart out for us. And I think it's important that we are hopeful. And even in the cases of some of the destructions or the devastations that I've had and the kind of implications it has on society, some of them can also be reversed. So I think if you're talking about environment, if you're talking about education or sorry, environmental education or conservation, I think the first mandate is to be hopeful, right? You need to be a positive person. You need to be, I mean, not just this, but even otherwise, it's always nice to be a positive human being. So I think for me, the message would be to stay positive and stay hopeful. A lot can be still done, irrespective of at what juncture in life that we all stand. We're still capable of reversing some of the things, and we can still strive to creating a better planet for all of us. So stay hopeful.
Wow, thank you for that very hopeful message. There's always usually a message of doom from everybody. But thank you for leaving us with that hope. And Avinash, all the best with everything that you do. And I hope that along with you together, we can all save our planet.
Please, and please visit us sometime. You still haven't seen us.
Yes, yes, I will.
Thanks.
Thank you, Avinash, and bye for
Thanks.
now.
Thanks, Anita. Take care. God bless.